Alright, so now we're at our login page and we just need to enter the username, which is admin, and our user password, which is admin123. Alright, so here we selected inpatient ward. You can select any location and we log in. Alright, so we're here on the interface. From here we'll go to configure metadata. We select that, and there we see concepts. Then we'll select manage concept dictionary, and then under concepts we'll select manage concepts. Alright, so the very first thing before you create a concept, you first need to search the concept. The reason why we search concepts first is to avoid duplications of concepts that are already in the system concept dictionary. Our very first concept is month and year diagnosed. So let's just search month and year diagnosed. Alright, so you can see here there are no entries that were found for month and year diagnosed. So this gives us a green light to continue or to create our first concept. So here we are going to select add new concept. Alright, so here's names and the full specified name. Since we are create our first concept is month and year diagnosed, we're going to type that in. Alright, so you can add here a synonym, and if you'd like, and you can add a search term, or here underneath here you can create a shorter name for month and year diagnosed, and here underneath here is where you describe your concept. So for this concept we're just going to describe, making it more specific. Our electronic form is mostly about diabetes, and so we will specify and say month and year diagnosed with diabetes. Alright, so month and year the patient was diagnosed with diabetes. Alright, so we're going to scroll down and you see underneath here is concept information. Our first concept information is class. So under class you can see there's a drop down list where you can expand here and see the different types of concepts. So for this month and year diagnosed, although this concept is asked as a question on our electronic form, the concept class is diagnosis because it describes the information related to when the diabetes diagnosis was made. So even though it sounds as if it's a question or a finding, because it's linked to the diabetes diagnosis, the class will be diagnosis. Alright, so we'll select that, and then under data type we will select, go to the drop down list, what type of data class is this? Is it a numeric? Is it coded? Is it a text? Is it date, time? All of these are different options. So for us, since we're talking about the month and the year, we're going to select date. Alright, we're done with our first concept. You can just verify if everything is correct, and then we save concept underneath here. Alright, so our second concept we're going to create is the age. So we're going to search age. So we can see that there's no age concept, so that's another green light, so we can add the new concept. We select that. Alright, so we are going to type in age. We'll just type in the description. Alright, so the current age of the patient. Alright, under class, go to the drop down list. This is finding. So we'll select finding, and under data type we'll select it's a numeric, right? The very first one there, it's a numeric. Alright, so you can see here under numeric there is absolutely high, critical high, normal low, critical low, absolute low, all of these ranges. So these are valid range of numbers which are allowed, right? So the system will not accept numbers outside of that range. So for example, for absolute high, if you indicate 100 on your electronic form, someone indicates 120, it will not be accepted. Or if you say absolute low is say 50, it will not be accepted by the system. So you could select here what is your critical highs, what is your normal highs, your normal lows, or your critical lows, or your absolute low. You can indicate those things. So for units, for age, your unit will be years. Alright, so here under decimal, you can select this. For example, if this question was based on the weight of the patient and perhaps the patient weighs 60.5 kgs, you would select that. Alright, so we can scroll down and save this concept. Alright, you can see it was saved. Alright, for the next concept, which is type of diabetes, it contains 3 different concept answers. So which is type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, as well as gestational diabetes, which some pregnant women get during their pregnancy. Alright, so we first need to create these concept answers. So the first one is type 1 diabetes. So we will search it first. Alright, so type 1 diabetes. So we have searched and there are no entries found. So we can go to add new concept and we will type in type 1 diabetes. Alright, the description we'll type in. Alright, so for class, so under class it is diagnosis, and the data type will be non-applicable, and then we save our first concept answer. Alright, so it's successfully saved. Our next one will search for type 2 diabetes. Alright, so before we continue, we can see that there is already a concept, diabetes mellitus type 2, which is diabetes. So we don't have to create a new concept because the system already has diabetes type 2. Alright, and the last one, the last concept answer is gestational diabetes. So let's search if there is one. Alright, so here you can see that there is already a concept such as gestational diabetes. So those two, we don't have to create new concepts for it. Alright, so now we can create the concept, which is type of diabetes. Let's go to add new concept. Alright, so it's the type of diabetes the patient has. Okay, let's go to concept information, class. So for this would be a diagnosis. So we go to the drop down and select diagnosis. The data type is it's coded. So it's already coded. So it's coded. So now we have to add our concept answers. So we go to add and now we'll search for our concept. Our first concept was type 1 diabetes. So we'll select that and we add concept, and then the next one is type 2. Okay, type 2, we add that concept, and then our last one is gestational diabetes. Alright, gestational diabetes, we select that and add the concept, and there we have it. Now we can save the concept. Alright, so our next concept, which also contains concept answers, which is currently on diabetes medication. So the patient is supposed to indicate yes or no. So we first need to create these concepts. So let's first check if we have a yes in our concept dictionary. Alright, so we have a yes. Let's search if we have a no. Alright, so it looks like we don't have a no. So we can add this new concept. Alright, so our concept is no. Alright, so you can see this concept name is not unique. So you can see that there is already a no in the system, but as we were searching, it was not there before. So no exists. Since we already have our two concept answers, which is yes and no, on the system, we just need to create the concept of currently on diabetes medication. So let's just change this to currently on diabetes medication. All right. Okay. All right, so that's our description. So under class, we know that this is now a finding. So we'll select finding, and then our data type would be coded. Since we want to add our concept answers, so we add, let's start with yes. Okay, and let's add no. All right, and then we will save. All right, so our next concept is medication collection point, and this concept contains three concept answers: government hospital, private clinic or hospital, and community pharmacy. Alright, so before we start to create this concept, we first need to create the concept answers. So let us first search for the concept answers. So the first concept we're going to search is a government hospital. Alright, so there's no entry found. So let us search for our next concept. Alright, so there's no entry of private clinic or hospital. So we'll search our next concept answer, that's community pharmacy. Alright, so all three of our concepts are not on the system. So let us search for our concept, which is medication collection point. Alright, so there are no entries found on the system. So that's another green light for us to create our concept. Alright, so let us first create our concept. Alright, so let's go to add new concept. And we'll type in government hospital, which is our first concept. Alright, let's add a synonym, which is state hospital. Alright, so we'll go down to concept information, and the class is miscellaneous, and our data type being non-applicable, and let us save the concept. Alright, perfect. So let us go and create our second concept answer, and the full specified name is private clinic or hospital. Alright, then we'll go back to concept information, and this class is going to be miscellaneous again, and the data type is non-applicable. Then we save the concept. Alright, and let's add our last concept answer, which is community pharmacy. Then we go to concept information and add class. We can add our data type, which is non-applicable. Then we can save the concept answer. Alright, so now we'll create our concept We go to add new concept, and our concept name is medication collection point. Alright, for description, we'll type in the place where the patient usually collects their diabetes medication. Perfect. So our concept information under class is finding, and our data type is coded. So let us add our concept answers. The first one being government hospital. All right. And our next one being private clinic or hospital. And then we add concept, and the last concept answer is community pharmacy. Alright, so we add the last concept. Alright, let's just verify everything is perfect, then we save concept. Alright, so our concept was successfully saved.
If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and leave any questions or comments in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.